Welcome back to this series of brief videos. Once you see something that changes everything, you can't unsee it, or at least I can't unsee it. So what if our ancestors knew exactly which gospel text they wanted to choose, because the basis was not Yeshua alone, but it was what Yeshua was bringing to us and pointing us towards. And what I mean is, Yeshua was pointing us to, quote unquote, the way. And the way, as understood by our ancestors in those first centuries, were the four paths in an ever ongoing cycle of growth and transformation. If that is the basis of Christianity, flowing from and through Yeshua, it then explains why we have these four texts, and these four texts are not a biography of Jesus. These four texts are not about the personality of Jesus. These four texts definitely come from history, but they are not about history. Each one of these gospel texts is the practice of a path on the cycle of growth and transformation. Therefore, each of the four passions is not a video cam of what happened back in those dusty streets of Jerusalem. Matthew is the passion of how we face change. Mark is the passion of how we move through times of tremendous trial and obstacles. John is the passion of joy when our hearts burst forth in new vitality. And Luke is the passion of how we grow by being of service to self and other. Now that we can understand the basis of the Gospels, now we have a wholly new Christianity to participate in and to revel in and to grow in. But this also means that all of our great teachers, all of them whose work I honor, must now give way to a new paradigm. So, yes, we have the work of Neil Douglas Klotz, who is bringing forward the Aramaic Jesus, but now his work needs to be set as not just here's what Jesus was saying in John, but here's how what we have in John is coming out of a very particular path of the Christos. And likewise, what Richard Rohr is teaching needs to be set in the new paradigm of here's not just the theology of theosis, here's the pathway of theosis that gives a whole new basis to the life of Yeshua the Christos. And John Philip Newell, in his beautiful bringing forth of the indigenous Celtic life of Jesus, of Yeshua, now needs to be set as the teaching of the four paths. Everything I believe that Yeshua came was not to point to himself, but to point all of us to the way of which he fully exhibited. And you can now understand why Holy Week is hurting us, because it took historical threads from the four different gospels, presented it to us as here's what we would have done if we had been there, sets us in history, emotionally pulls us away from a story of love and says, look what you have done to your God. Look what your God suffered for you. That is not Yeshua the Christos, who came to show us how to be people of deep love and justice. not through what the words that he taught, but by the four paths he walked. And by that very grace, we too can walk those paths. So yes, we need to stop Holy Week. We need to understand why it is hurting our prayer. It's hurting our spirituality. And as I say that so passionately, we also need to understand this is going to be a long process of transformation. It's not going to happen in a day or a year or 50 years. But it does begin with each one of us saying, we know that we must leave Holy Week behind. Now let's bring forward the deeper Easter, the one from our first centuries, the one that in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, Roman Catholic, Episcopal, Anglican, Lutheran, all began to do the work of bringing forward the ancient Easter and stopping the prayer of quote unquote Holy Week. So I invite you to be people of a renewed Christianity. In the psychological language, if you're hearing this message, you are a first responder. Know that the seeds that we are going to sow together will become the abundant field of grain for tomorrow. Thank you for being here. Let us pray. Let us create that deeper Christian spirituality that our hearts need and long for.